So minor spoiler warnings before I get into the video. I will be showing off the final boss of Revelations as well as later portions of the game. So if you haven't played the game and you want to see these for yourself, you might want to skip this video. So Resident Evil Revelations is an RE game that I have not played until recently, but I have played all of the RE Engine games that have released, Resident Evil 4, 5 and 6, as well as the on-rail games on Wii and Resident Evil Outbreak on my PS2. I do plan on revisiting all of the Resident Evil games eventually, although it will just be my thoughts on the game, not really a full-on review or retrospective. So I've played Resident Evil Revelations using my Switch 2 via backwards compatibility, and Revelations runs docked at 1080p 60fps as well as 720p 60fps in handheld. For the purposes of this video, I've mostly played in docked mode so that I can record this footage. So the story of Resident Evil Revelations splits into what the game calls episodes, and they're split up into 12 episodes in total, with each episode having upwards to 3 parts to them. Some of them maybe have 1 or 2 parts, and each of these parts by themselves aren't really that long. They can range from as little as 8 minutes to as long as 30 minutes, and as far as I'm aware, you can only really manually save at the end of each part or episode, and usually the game will just auto save for you every time you reach a checkpoint. You start off the game as Jill right as she boards the Queen Zenobia with her partner Parker in a mission to find Chris and Jessica just after the BSAA lost contact with them while they were out on their own mission, but discover that this ship was crawling with a new type of BOW known as the Ooze, which are humans infected with the T-Abyss virus, and eventually find out that Chris isn't even on the ship and that this whole thing was a setup. You then get knocked out and have to find a way out of the ship as you encounter other characters and even see the story of what happens with Chris, as well as what happened to Parker in the past and what 2 other goofballs, Keith and Quint, were up to in the events of Revelations. They try to find out what happened with Jill and Chris and also attempt to assist Jill and Chris when they figure out what happens and how. It's kind of weird. Keith and Quint aren't really as important to the story. All they do is like just tell Jill that there's maybe a UAV on the ship, how to control the UAV, and that's pretty much the only important thing they've done in the entire story. So the way this game shows its story is by making you jump between 3 different sets of characters, with Jill being the obvious main character, since Jill is the only one that you can change weapons and mod weapons for, and she's also the one you play the most. You'll pretty much be jumping between her and other characters, mostly Chris, Parker, and Keith. Other characters like Jessica and Quinn are just side assist characters that appear as you play as Chris or Keith. So the jump between playing all of these characters with each episode or part can be quite jarring, as they can really happen quite abruptly, like one moment with Jill and Parker holding up someone they just met in the Queen Zenobia, and suddenly you're thrown as Parker back in Terra Grigia when the Terra Grigia panic took place, which is this incident that happened which caused the city to use its own solar system to just shoot down and nuke the city when this terrorist group called Veltro infected and released a bunch of BOWs in it. So this isn't really bad per se, but it happens so suddenly, especially when you get invested into a certain part of the story. But other times that I think it's done well is when Jill and Parker were at the bottom of Queen Zenobia and the room was just being filled up with water, and the game just suddenly cuts you into playing as Chris and Jessica boarding a ship. It's not shown which ship they board, but it's believed to be the same ship that Jill and Parker were in. And after you reach the same room on the ship, you find out that you're on the Queen Zenobia's sister ship, and that the whole time they were misled into believing that they were in the same ship as Jill and Parker. So these moments were quite fun to see. It's just twists that you see that can really shock you. So I do think that this whole episode thing can be done well. It is done well in some parts of Revelations, and other times it just feels quite unnecessary. So as for controls, this game originally released on the Nintendo 3DS on 26 January 2012, 3 years after Resident Evil 5 came out, but 9 months before Resident Evil 6, so it might be due to the fact that this was a spin-off released after Resident Evil 5 as well as being released on the 3DS. But the controls are pretty similar to Resident Evil 5 with strafing, which in of itself has a similar control scheme to RE4. Just that you can control the camera and aiming using the right analog stick instead of using the left analog stick. And assuming you're using the normal control scheme instead of the classic controls which mimic RE4's controls, it's pretty much just the left analog stick for moving, right analog stick to control the camera. You use the left stick if you move it left or right, you'll be strafing. And depending on whether you chose the control scheme 1 or 2, you either use the ZL or L buttons to aim and the ZR or R buttons to shoot. You'll also use either ZR or R to use your throwable items such as grenades depending on your control scheme. And X will be used for healing, A is for interacting, Y for reloading, and if you're moving backwards and you press B, you'll also do a quick turn. And similar to Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, the original game and the remake, you do have the ability to dodge, but just like the original Resident Evil 3, the dodge feels like it has a random chance of triggering. Now, I don't know if this was done because if you're able to dodge pretty much every attack, you won't be able to take damage. But to activate the dodge, the game says you either move the analog stick up or down and press B before you get hit. But honestly, it feels like it activates less than 50% of the time. You can't really overly rely on it. You pretty much just have to create space and aim and shoot at the enemies instead of praying you get to dodge. But one way that seemed to work that let me dodge more is to just wiggle the left stick up and down while aiming, and it can activate the dodge that way. Now for the Switch version of the game, I've also met this one weird quirk that I found while I was playing it. So the motion controls to get the gyro aim working, you do have to turn it on in the settings. It's not on by default, and for some reason it only works with the Switch Joy-Cons. It doesn't work with the Pro Controller. Specifically, I tried using the Pro Controller 2. I don't have a Pro Controller to test it with since mine got stick drift. But the gyro aim really only works with the Joy-Con. So for the whole playthrough of this game, I've used my Switch Joy-Cons instead of my Pro Controller, since trying to aim with just the analog stick is quite difficult. I'd rather have gyro aim enabled as well. So as I've mentioned earlier, the game does use the same control scheme as Resident Evil 5, meaning that it's also played with an over-the-shoulder angle. And since I was also playing the re-release version, you can control the camera using the right analog stick. If you played on the 3DS, you could get a second stick with either having a new 3DS XL and use the C stick, or you use the circle pad, which is only compatible with the older 3DS models. So while you play as Jill, you'll be spending a lot of time just exploring the Queen Zenobia, solving puzzles, backtracking previously explored locations, picking up key items to progress, and fighting for your life as enemies come in. Pretty standard for a lot of Resident Evil titles. And compared to Jill, while you play as Chris, Parker, or Keith, it's pretty much just getting from point A to point B while fending off enemies with very little variation in between. There isn't much else you do while you're not playing as Jill, since their segments are purely just to add more story or more context to the story of Revelations. And moving on to the enemies, you'll mostly find just these generic ooze enemies, as the game calls them. The game and the wiki calls them ooze. So there's the generic type that's pretty much your plain, normal, regular zombie. But they're not really zombies. They're just BOWs infected by the T-Abyss virus. So they do have other variants as well, like ones with blades on their arms and another one that can shoot some bone-like object at you. But the most annoying variant of these ooze enemies that I've encountered in this game appears somewhere at the bottom of the ship, and when the ship starts to flood. They're these underwater swimming ooze that you cannot see if you're above the water, and they can just spawn randomly in front of you, behind you. You either have to use your Genesis to see them, or wait for them to just come out of the water for you to shoot at them, but they will jump at you. So I've lost quite a lot of health with them. Honestly, they're not that scary, they're more annoying than anything, especially when there's a lot of them. And saying this game was released on the 3DS, there are some bosses you face. I think there's about 4 or 5 bosses that you'll see in this game. So the first boss you meet is another variant of the ooze, just that it's really big, and it also uses a chainsaw, following the standard set by RE4, I guess, where the first boss you meet also has a chainsaw, and then RE5 had it after the Executioner, so I think it was like the second mini boss that you find in RE5. So this ooze in Revelations with a chainsaw mimics something similar to RE4 in the village, where there are constant hordes of other enemies. They will constantly spawn in while you fight this other ooze, and for some reason this big ooze with a chainsaw, the first time you meet it, has a really bloated health pool, so you'll be shooting at it a lot. At this point of the game, you'll also have a lot of bullets, but they'll be drained just trying to get rid of the horde and this ooze boss as well. So I've actually died quite a few times in this segment before I managed to take down the ooze with a lot of running. I think this segment took the longest part in the game for me. So this game also has another kind of enemy, which is something like a stalker-like enemy, but not really. It's this girl you meet at the beginning of the game. You see her die to 2 ooze like really early on in Revelations, and you will encounter this mini-boss specifically when you come back to try and find her. I believe they call it the bilge in the Queen Zenobia. So when you go back to the room where you saw her die, she will no longer be in the room. And right when you leave the room to go back up the staircase, she will suddenly spawn along with one other ooze enemy. So she's an enemy. She's kind of like Nemesis in Resident Evil 3, where every time you beat her, she goes down, she'll drop a weapon mod, and every time it's this illegal weapon mod that she will drop. So she doesn't actually die, she will keep spawning later on in the game, and at one point in the game, I don't think you were meant to kill her at that point, but she still drops the illegal mod, because right after you kill her at that point and you enter the room right beside it, she will just magically be in the center of the room as if nothing happened in the previous room prior when you took her down there. Thought that was quite funny. I think the devs really meant for you to run away from her, because at that point, if I remember correctly, you were rushing to a different area and she was just there to kind of prevent your progress. So the last 3 bosses I can remember fighting in this game is another one when you're trying to reach the antenna of the ship and you get attacked while you're in the elevator. So after reaching the top of this elevator, you will actually face this monster. It looked nothing like what I expected it to look like, since it had this build up in the elevator itself. While when it attacked you with a tail, two things that looked like a tail, but then when you reach the actual fight, it looked nothing like what I expected it to be. The fight itself was also quite disappointing. All this monster does is charge at you, so all you needed to do is just move to the side while it attacked and then just keep dealing damage, rinse and repeat, then it dies. And the next boss was this big spectacle. It's kind of like that boss in RE5 when you finally meet up with that one really annoying short guy that you're trying to catch. Then he injects himself in the virus and then he turns into this big POW at the sea and he fights you. It's kind of similar to that. I think that's where they took the inspiration from, since this is also on a ship at sea, except this time you're just shooting giant tentacles to take it down until Kirk, a helicopter pilot that was sent to exfiltrate you out of the ship, drops you rocket launchers, and then you keep using rocket launchers until a cutscene plays and you get onto the helicopter, and then you just use the minigun to keep shooting at the thing until it dies. So I thought these on-rail segments were okay. They're kind of boring since the enemy doesn't really do much. It's just these parasitic tentacles that keep popping out of the body. It'll keep trying to jump at you, then you have to shoot them until it goes down. It's pretty much the same thing over and over again. I don't blame them for the variety, and probably because this was developed for the 3DS, so they might have faced technical difficulties trying to do other things into the fight. But it really felt like a basic on rails fight, something similar to what we had in Resident Evil 5, when you're just driving through Africa until you meet El Gigante. That was also quite simple from what I remember. It's pretty much just parasites popping out of the body. You shoot the parasites until El Gigante goes down. Pretty simple. It's a neat break from the standard gameplay. So I appreciate that it's there. It can get quite monotonous, but it's an okay part of the game. So the last boss I can't remember if there's really any other bosses, but I'm pretty sure it's just these. So the last boss is the main leader of this terrorist group called Veltro. So he injected himself with the T-Abyss virus. There seems to be a trend with a lot of the villains injecting themselves with the virus of the game. So basically he transforms into what looks like a tyrant. And of course the heart is exposed on his chest. And other than that, he also has another weak spot at the back of his head. And this fight is just this guy teleporting and summoning illusions, and you're just supposed to aim at the one with the heart exposed. And it will just keep doing that. Sure, there's other variations. Sometimes it'll like spawn like multiple other illusions, or he'll spawn an illusion first or multiple illusions at once, and then afterwards then he spawns. You're just supposed to wait until the real one comes out. It's quite easy. He doesn't really spawn more than one at a time. Sure, he'll summon like back to back, but there will only really be the illusion or himself. There won't be more than two at once. I'm not sure if that's a technical difficulty or if it's like a design choice, but because of that, it made this boss quite easy when you figure out how to do it. I died a few times before I figured this out, but when you find that out, the boss becomes a cakewalk. It's really quite easy. So after you beat the game, the only other thing left you can do in this game is to either do New Game Plus, where you can carry over the weapons you've unlocked into the new game and choose a different difficulty, or you can play something called Raid Mode, which is something that was added in Revelations and carried on into Revelations 2. So you actually unlock Raid Mode at the beginning of the game, but I suggest playing it after the main campaign, since there are stages in Raid Mode that will spoil the main game. You'll just show later portions of the game. And in Raid Mode, all you really have is, it's basically a mode where there's all these different stages and that you play to gain experience, level up, and collect new weapons. So there are character levels and weapon levels. So of course this dictates the amount of damage you can do. But because there are levels in this game, enemies can have quite the big health pool, and you really need to get new weapons and weapon mods if you want to take out these enemies with a reasonable amount of bullets. So as you play through each level in Raid Mode, there will be a certain amount of enemies that spawn, and you need to kill them to progress through each level, and you'll get keys after beating a certain amount of enemies to unlock new areas in the level, and to unlock the final area to reach the ending. And how well you do in each level determines the amount of BP you gain, which is what you use to buy more weapons, more weapon mods, ammo pouches to increase your ammo limit in each level. And it's also used to restock your bullets after each level. This game doesn't automatically start you with bullets at the start of each level. You have to purchase bullets. If not, you'll be entering stages with just one clip and not a lot of bullets, or most of the time not enough bullets to beat the stage, which I'm not sure if I like that part, but I think it's okay. Restocking doesn't really cost so much, but you have to manually do it every time after each stage. So each stages also have like different enemy variations. It's pretty much the same enemies in the campaign, but there's some enemies that can be different. Like there's just the regular ooze, but it's smaller, and because it's smaller, it moves faster. Or there are enemies where it shows you that they have a shield, making them more tanky so they take more bullets. So that really makes it so that it's kind of a necessity to get higher leveled weapons and weapon mods, so you might end up replaying stages just to get a chance of a better weapon. So raid mode is also a way you can unlock costumes for the main game. You After you clear certain conditions like beating all stages in this or getting a rare weapon to unlock costumes. And overall, I think it's a neat addition to the game. It helps to increase your playtime. It's quite enjoyable, but not exactly necessary. You don't really unlock weapons, or to my knowledge, unlike Resident Evil 4, where if you beat a certain level, I remember you could unlock the hand cannon. So here it's just costumes from what I can tell, so it's not really a necessity to play raid mode in Revelations, but it is a neat feature to have. And if you like costumes, I personally prefer to play with the regular outfits in each of the games instead of other costumes for these games. But if you enjoy that, you can unlock those and play through the campaign with other outfits. So if you haven't really played any of the Revelations titles, or if you haven't played Resident Evil Revelations, I recommend getting it. It's quite cheap every time it goes on sale. I believe it's like less than $5 on Steam every time it goes on sale. But I picked this up for $7.99 on the Switch eShop, and you can find this on pretty much every other major console and Steam, so it's quite easy to get your hands on this game. So I would recommend playing this game. You don't have to play any of the other RE titles to understand the story of this game, but I would just suggest playing every Resident Evil game. They're good games. And yeah, I think that'll be all of my thoughts on Resident Evil Revelations. Thanks for watching the video.